Sarah Bennett was 15 years old when her stepfather William told her to be gone by October. It was late August 1883 in Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and William had decided that feeding a teenage stepdaughter through another harsh Montana winter was an expense he wouldn't bear. Sarah's mother Elizabeth had died in July from complications after childbirth. The baby died too, leaving William alone with his 8-year-old son from his first marriage and Sarah, Elizabeth's daughter, from her first marriage. William made his calculation quickly. Keep his blood son, send away the stepdaughter who reminded him of a wife he'd barely loved and now resented for dying. On August 25th, William gave Sarah $12 and told her to find work in town before the first snow. She was 15, had basic reading and arithmetic, could cook and sew adequately. Perhaps the hotel needed help. Perhaps a family needed a live-in domestic, not his concern anymore. Sarah took the $12 and made a different choice. She'd build a cabin on unclaimed land near Silver Creek and survive until spring, when she could work for wages and save money. Building shelter seemed impossible, but so did every other option. At least if she built something, she'd own it. The land she found was at the base of Lone Pine Ridge, a wooded slope 2 miles from town. The spot had a natural advantage, a large granite outcropping that formed a windbreak on the north side. Building against the rock face would give her one wall for free and protection from north winds. With $12 she bought a good axe for $3, a handsaw for $2, nails for $1, a small cook pot for $1, and food supplies for $5. The cabin itself would be built from timber she'd cut and materials she'd scavenge. She began on September 1st with work that would consume every daylight hour for the next 6 weeks. The timber cutting was relentless. She'd wake at dawn, walk to Lone Pine Ridge with her axe, and begin selecting trees. Not large trees, those were impossible to manage alone. She targeted pines 3 to 4 inches in diameter, small enough to fell safely, large enough to provide structural timber. Each tree required about an hour of work. First, chopping the notch on the side she wanted it to fall. 30 minutes of sustained axe swings, cutting deep into the trunk, creating a wedge-shaped notch. Then moving to the opposite side and cutting toward the notch. When the trunk finally cracked and the tree began falling, she'd step back and watch it crash down, hoping it didn't catch on other trees. Then came limbing, chopping off all the branches flush with the trunk. Another 20 minutes of axe work. Then cutting the trunk into usable lengths, an 8-foot log for the cabin length, a 10-foot log for the width. Each cut took 5 minutes of sawing with her handsaw. Finally, dragging the log down the ridge to her building site. The logs weighed perhaps 40 to 60 pounds, manageable but exhausting. She dragged them one at a time, arriving back at the site sweating and trembling. She needed approximately 40 logs total for the 3 walls she had to build. The granite outcropping provided the 4th wall naturally. 40 logs meant 40 trips up the ridge. 40 trees felled. 40 hours of cutting and dragging spread across 3 weeks of September. The foundation work was simpler but still time-consuming. She gathered stones from the ridge, flat rocks that could be stacked to create a level base. The foundation needed to raise the first log course off the ground to prevent rot. She built 4 stone piers at the corners and 2 additional piers at midpoints along the longer walls. The log construction began in late September. She'd learned basic notching from watching her stepfather build fence posts. The technique was simple. Cut a notch at each end of the log so it would fit over the log below, creating a stacked corner. Her notches were rough and uneven, but they worked. Laying the first course was critical. The logs had to be level, had to sit properly on the stone piers, had to create a rectangular outline. She spent an entire day positioning and repositioning the first 4 logs until they were correct. Then came the slow process of building upward. Cut a log, drag it to the site, lift it onto the wall, notch the ends with the axe, position it, check for level, adjust. Each log course took a full day. By early October, she had 4 courses completed, approximately 3 feet of wall height. By mid-October, 7 courses, about 5 feet high, adequate ceiling height for a tiny cabin. The critical innovation came from something Sarah had seen in her stepfather's barn 2 years earlier. The barn had a double roof, an old roof that had leaked, and rather than tear it off completely, William had simply built a new roof over it, leaving a gap between the 2 layers. Sarah had noticed during winter that the barn was noticeably warmer than other buildings. Warmer than the house sometimes. She'd asked William about it once, and he'd dismissed it as coincidence. But Sarah had observed it multiple times. The double roof created warmth. She didn't understand the technical physics, but she understood the practical result. 2 roofs with air between them kept buildings warmer, and she desperately needed warmth in a cabin that would have no proper stove, no thick walls, no conventional insulation. She decided to build her cabin roof the same way. First, she'd create a basic roof of split boards laid across roof poles. Then, she'd build a second roof layer 6 inches above the first, creating an air gap. The concept was simple. The execution would be difficult. Building 2 roofs required double the materials and double the labor. She'd need 32 roof poles instead of 16, double the split boards, double the positioning and securing work. But if it provided even modest additional warmth, it was worth the effort. The first roof layer began in early October. She cut 16 roof poles from pine trees, poles about 3 inches in diameter, 10 feet long to span the cabin's width. Each pole required cutting, dragging, and positioning. She laid them across the 8-foot length of the cabin, spaced 6 inches apart. The poles rested on the top log course of the walls. Then came the brutal work of splitting boards. She'd select a larger pine log, 6 to 8 inches in diameter. Using her axe as a wedge, she'd drive it into the end grain of the log, creating a split. Once the split started, she'd work the axe deeper, forcing the log to split lengthwise. The result was rough boards, uneven thickness, rough surfaces, but adequate for roofing. Each log yielded perhaps 4 usable boards. She needed approximately 30 boards to cover the 16 roof poles. That meant splitting 8 logs. Each log took perhaps 2 hours of sustained effort. Her arms ached constantly from the pounding and forcing required to split the wood. By mid-October, she had 30 rough boards. She laid them across the roof poles, overlapping them slightly to prevent water infiltration, secured them with the nails she'd purchased. The first roof layer was complete, rough and crude but weather-tight. Then came the second layer. This required more precision. She needed to create supports that would hold the second roof layer exactly 6 inches above the first. Too close, and the air gap wouldn't provide adequate insulation. Too far, and the structure would be unstable. She cut small posts from pine branches, posts 6 inches long, 2 inches in diameter, needed 8 posts total, 4 along each side of the roof. She positioned them standing vertically on top of the first roof layer, secured them, then laid 16 more roof poles across them. The second set of roof poles now sat 6 inches above the first roof layer, supported by the small posts. The air gap was created, 6 inches of space running the full length and width of the cabin between the 2 roof layers. Finally, she split another 30 boards and laid them across the second set of roof poles, creating the outer roof layer. The work took 3 weeks total. By early November, the double roof was complete. Standing back and looking at it, the structure did appear odd. 2 distinct roof layers with visible gap between them. It looked like a mistake, like she'd built a roof, realized it was wrong, and tried to fix it by building another one on top. But Sarah knew the gap was intentional. The trapped air would hold heat inside the cabin. She chinked the gaps between wall logs with mud and moss, built a simple door from split boards, created a small window opening on the south wall. No glass, just a shutter she could open for light and close for warmth. For heating, she couldn't afford a stove. Instead, she built a simple stone fireplace in one corner, using rocks from the area. The fireplace was crude, stacked stones mortared with mud, but it would burn wood and vent smoke through a gap at the roof peak. By mid-October, the cabin was complete, 8 by 10 feet, 5-foot walls, double roof with 6-inch air gap, stone back wall from the granite outcropping, crude fireplace, dirt floor, one window with wooden shutter. Total cost, $12 for tools and food. Everything else built from materials she'd cut, gathered, or scavenged. The town's reaction was immediate mockery when people discovered what she'd built. The Bennett girl had built a playhouse, a tiny shed barely big enough to stand in, with 2 roofs like she didn't know how to build properly. She'd freeze to death when real winter came. Thomas Morrison, the town's carpenter, rode out to see the structure in late October, walked around the tiny cabin shaking his head. "Miss Bennett, you've built a hen house, 8 by 10 feet? That's not living space, that's storage. And why do you have 2 roofs? Did you make a mistake and try to fix it? This is amateur construction that won't keep you alive through Montana winter." The double roof creates an air gap. Trapped air provides insulation. This cabin will stay warmer than a single roof structure. That's nonsense. Air doesn't insulate anything. You need thick walls and a proper stove. You've built a shed with a fantasy about air keeping you warm. You'll be dead by January. Through November, Sarah tested her cabin. The nights were cold, dropping to 20 degrees. She'd burn a small fire in her crude fireplace before sleeping. The cabin would warm to perhaps 55 degrees. After the fire died, the temperature would drop, but far more slowly than she'd expected. In a normal cabin with a single roof, heat escapes upward rapidly. Warm air rises, hits the roof, transfers heat through the boards, and is lost to the outside. In Sarah's double-roof cabin, warm air rose and hit the first roof layer, but the 6-inch air gap above that layer prevented the heat from transferring through. The trapped still air acted as a barrier. Heat loss was dramatically reduced. She was burning maybe 4 small logs per evening, enough to warm the space before sleeping. The tiny 80-square-foot volume meant even a small fire had significant effect, and the double roof meant the warmth lasted hours after the fire died. Her neighbors in conventional cabins were burning wood continuously, feeding fires all night, struggling to maintain comfortable temperatures. Sarah burned a small fire for 2 hours, then slept comfortably as the trapped air in her roof prevented rapid heat loss. December brought the cold that proved everything and revealed which structures could maintain life and which couldn't. The cold arrived December 8th with terrifying speed. Morning started at 15 degrees, cold but manageable for early December Montana. By noon, 0 degrees. By evening, -10 degrees. By midnight, -20 degrees sustained. The temperature stayed at -20 for 7 days straight. No warming trend, no relief. Just sustained Arctic cold that tested every structure and heating system in Silver Creek. Sarah's tiny cabin faced the test with her crude stone fireplace as the only heat source. Each evening, she'd follow the same routine: gather kindling and 4 small logs, build a fire in the fireplace, burn the wood for about 2 hours, enough time for the 80 square feet to warm significantly. The small volume was advantage. 80 square feet equals 640 cubic feet of airspace with 5-foot ceiling height. A small fire produced enough heat to raise that volume from 40 degrees to 60 degrees in less than an hour. The heat accumulated quickly in the confined space. Then came the critical test: what happened after the fire died? In a normal cabin with single roof construction, the heat would escape rapidly through the roof. Warm air rises naturally. In conventional construction, that warm air hits the roof boards, transfers heat through them, and is lost to the outside. The cabin cools quickly. Within 2 hours of the fire dying, temperature drops 20 degrees or more. Sarah's double roof changed everything. The warm air rose and hit the first roof layer, but instead of transferring through to cold outside air, the heat encountered the 6-inch air gap. Still air is a poor conductor of heat. The trapped air acted as a barrier. Heat couldn't easily transfer across it. The second roof layer provided additional protection. The result was dramatically slowed heat loss. After her fire died around 8 p.m., the cabin temperature would drop perhaps 2 degrees per hour. By midnight, 4 hours later, the temperature had dropped only 8 degrees, from 60 to 52. By morning at 6 a.m., 10 hours after the fire died, the cabin was still 45 degrees. 45 degrees wasn't comfortable, but it was survivable with blankets, and it was achieved with zero fuel consumption for 10 hours, just the retained heat trapped by the double roof design. Her neighbors in conventional cabins were suffering catastrophically. The Morrison family's cabin, standard single-roof construction, significantly larger than Sarah's at 16 by 20 feet, couldn't maintain 50 degrees despite burning wood continuously day and night. Thomas Morrison was burning approximately 25 logs daily, feeding the fire every 2 hours around the clock. His wife Catherine took the night shift, waking every 2 hours to add wood. They were exhausted from the constant fire tending. Their children were cold, despite being indoors constantly, wearing multiple layers of clothing day and night, and their winter wood supply was depleting at catastrophic rates. At 25 logs per day, they were consuming in 3 days what should have lasted 2 weeks. The Henderson family's situation was worse. Their cabin was poorly chinked with gaps in the log construction. Cold air poured through every crack. Their single roof leaked heat like a sieve. By day 4 of the -20 cold, they'd run out of firewood completely, had burned everything combustible. Furniture, fence posts, interior wallboards pried loose in desperation. By day 5, their cabin temperature was 40 degrees inside, despite maximum efforts. The children, 3 kids ages 4, 7, and 9, were showing hypothermia symptoms, lethargy, confusion, grayish skin tone. They were dying slowly in their own home, while -20 weather continued outside. By day 5, desperate families started seeking help. Robert Henderson came to Sarah's cabin, expecting to find a freezing girl. Instead, he found the tiny structure noticeably warmer than his own house. How? He asked simply, standing in the 80-square-foot space that was perhaps 48 degrees despite no fire burning. Our cabin is failing. You're surviving in a shed. Sarah showed him the double roof, explained the air gap concept, explained how trapped air prevented heat loss. Henderson touched the underside of the first roof layer, slightly warm from yesterday's fire, touched the second layer, cold. The air gap between them was maintaining temperature difference. You built 2 roofs because you understood air traps heat. I built 1 roof because that's how everyone builds, and you're warmer than I am. By day 6, 8 families had visited Sarah's cabin, and what they found challenged everything they believed about construction and heating. They'd expected to find a freezing girl surviving through sheer stubbornness in inadequate shelter. Instead, they found a cabin that was noticeably warmer than their own homes, despite being a fraction of the size and using a fraction of the firewood. Robert Henderson came on day 6, desperate and humbled. His family had been sheltering at the Morrison house for 2 days after their own cabin became uninhabitable. He'd heard that Sarah Bennett was somehow surviving in her tiny shed. Came to see if the rumors were true. He stood in the 80-square-foot space and felt warmth that his 16 by 20 cabin had never maintained. Touched the underside of the first roof layer, slightly warm, retaining heat from yesterday's fire. Reached up and touched the second roof layer, cold, showing that the air gap was preventing heat transfer. You built 2 roofs because you understood trapped air provides insulation, he said slowly, processing the concept. I built 1 roof because that's conventional, and my family is freezing while you're comfortable in a shed. How did you know? I didn't know for certain, Sarah admitted. I saw my stepfather's barn had 2 roofs by accident, and I noticed it was warmer. I thought it might work for a cabin, so I tried it. You experimented based on observation, while I built based on convention without questioning if convention was actually effective. Thomas Morrison came on day 7, and the visit was difficult for both of them. He was the town's professional carpenter who dismissed Sarah's cabin as inadequate. Now he stood in that cabin, warm despite no fire burning, while his own house was failing despite his decades of construction experience. "The air gap works," he said, examining the roof construction carefully. "You're losing heat perhaps half as fast as normal single-roof construction. I've been building for 20 years, built dozens of cabins. Never thought about the insulation value of trapped air. Never questioned whether the standard single roof was actually the most effective approach." He paused, looked at Sarah directly. "A 15-year-old girl with no training taught me something I should have learned decades ago. That's humbling. But it's also important. You've proven that observation and experimentation matter more than experience and convention." Through the remainder of that winter, Sarah became an unexpected consultant on cabin heating efficiency. Families would visit, ask to see the double roof, want to understand the air gap concept. She'd explain patiently the importance of trapped still air, how heat rises and needs barriers to prevent escape, how small spaces heat more efficiently than large ones. By February, 4 families had asked Sarah to help them add second roof layers to their existing cabins. The work required careful planning. You couldn't just build another roof on top without considering structural support. The additional weight required verification that the existing walls could handle the load. The air gap spacing needed to be consistent. Ventilation at the edges was important to prevent moisture accumulation. Sarah would visit each site, assess the structure, explain what modifications were needed. Then she'd supervise the construction for $2 per project. The families did the actual labor, but Sarah provided the technical knowledge. The Morrison family was first. Thomas wanted to prove he could learn from the girl he'd dismissed. He built support posts every 4 feet along the cabin length, creating stable foundation for the second roof layer, maintained 6-inch air gap throughout, added ventilation gaps at the eaves. The work took 2 weeks. The result was immediate. Their firewood consumption dropped from 25 logs per day to 12 logs per day. Their interior temperature was easier to maintain. The children were finally comfortable. Catherine Morrison told Sarah directly, "You saved my children, not just this winter, every winter going forward. That knowledge is worth more than $2. The Henderson family couldn't afford to hire Sarah, but she helped them anyway. Showed Robert how to build the support structure, explained the air gap spacing, supervised the work for no payment. "You came to my cabin seeking help when your family was dying," Sarah said. "I'm not going to charge you for knowledge that might save your children next winter." She lived in that tiny cabin for 3 years, from age 15 to 18. The structure that everyone had called inadequate became her proof that independence was possible, that survival didn't require charity or desperate marriage or servitude. Through those 3 years, Sarah earned money from odd jobs in Silver Creek, washing clothes for families, 50 cents per day, mending and sewing, 25 cents per garment, garden work in summer, 75 cents per day. The work was inconsistent but added up. By the end of her first year, she'd saved $14. By the end of year 2, $31 total. By age 18, she had $62 saved. The cabin consultation work supplemented her income significantly. Through 1884 and 1885, she consulted on 7 double-roof projects. At $2 per project, that was $14, nearly a month's worth of washing work compressed into a few days of technical consultation. The work also built her reputation as someone who understood construction despite her age and gender. By spring 1886, when Sarah turned 18, she had enough money to buy proper lumber and build a larger house. She purchased milled boards from the Silver Creek sawmill, expensive but precisely cut, unlike her rough split boards. Built a 12 by 16 cabin with proper floor, proper windows, and a proper stove. But she incorporated the double roof design. The new cabin had the same 6-inch air gap that had proven effective in her tiny first cabin, and she kept the original 8 by 10 structure, maintained it as a workshop and storage building, refused to tear it down despite people saying it was no longer needed. "This cabin saved my life," she'd explain. "Kept me warm when conventional cabins failed. Taught me that observation and experimentation matter more than following tradition. I'm keeping it as a reminder that small, well-designed structures outperform large, conventional ones." Her stepfather William came to see her in summer 1886, 3 years after he'd sent her away with $12. He stood looking at her property, the original tiny cabin maintained and functional, the new larger cabin with its innovative double roof, the consulting work she'd built into a reputation, stood looking at the success his stepdaughter had achieved after he'd abandoned her. "I was wrong to send you away," he said, voice quiet with shame. "You were 15. I should have helped you. Instead, I gave you $12 and told you to leave. I thought you'd end up desperate, accepting any work, any situation. Instead, you built this." Sarah could have been angry, could have thrown his abandonment back at him, could have pointed out that she'd nearly frozen her first winter, that she'd worked herself to exhaustion, that his cruelty had nearly killed her. Instead, she was honest. "You made a choice based on what was convenient for you. I made choices based on what would keep me alive. I'm not interested in your apology now. It doesn't change what happened. But I'm also not interested in holding bitterness. You're not part of my life anymore. That's already settled." The honesty was brutal, but fair. William had chosen to abandon her. She'd chosen to survive without him. Their relationship was permanently changed, but there was no need for ongoing anger. Just acceptance of reality and moving forward separately. Sarah married in 1889 at age 21. A lumber mill worker named James Porter, who'd heard about the girl who'd built the double-roof cabin. He sought her out specifically because he wanted a wife who understood construction, who could be a partner in building their life together rather than someone who needed taking care of. They built their house together on Sarah's property, a 16 by 20 cabin with double roof design that Sarah specified. James did the heavy timber work. Sarah supervised the roof construction, ensuring proper air gap spacing and support structure. The house stayed warmer with less firewood than any comparable structure in Silver Creek. They raised 4 children on that property. Sarah taught each of them the double roof principle, the importance of observation, the value of questioning convention. 2 of her children became carpenters who incorporated air gap insulation into their standard construction methods. One moved to Butte and built houses professionally using double roof designs. The other worked in Helena teaching construction techniques that included insulation principles. The original 8 by 10 cabin with its double roof remained standing and functional for 63 years. Sarah maintained it throughout her life, used it as workshop and storage, but primarily kept it as demonstration. When people asked about heating efficiency or insulation, she'd show them the tiny cabin, explain how she'd built it with $12, how it had kept her alive when larger, more expensive cabins failed. Sarah died in 1941 at age 73. The obituary in the Silver Creek Tribune mentioned her marriage to James Porter, her 4 children, her grandchildren, but it focused primarily on the cabin. The 8 by 10 structure with the double roof that had proven trapped air could provide insulation as effective as expensive materials. The 15-year-old who'd survived Montana winter in a shed because she understood physics better than trained carpenters, understood convention. The Montana Historical Society acquired the property in 1967. The original tiny cabin was still standing, though the roof layers had deteriorated. They restored it using Sarah's original construction method, 2 roof layers with 6-inch air gap. Modern thermal analysis confirmed what Sarah had discovered through observation. The double roof reduced heat loss by approximately 45 to 50% compared to single roof construction of the same materials. The measurements were precise. In controlled testing with identical cabins built side by side, one with single roof, one with double roof and 6-inch air gap, the double roof cabin maintained interior temperature approximately 2.2 times longer after heat source was removed. The trapped air layer provided insulation equivalent to approximately 4 inches of modern fiberglass insulation. Sarah's innovation wasn't unique to her. Double roof construction appeared in various cultures historically, but her specific application, a 15-year-old building emergency shelter with scavenged materials and succeeding through observation rather than training, was documented and preserved. The cabin became teaching tool for modern construction students studying the history of insulation principles. The story is about a girl thrown out at 15 who built shelter incorporating knowledge from observation rather than training, who proved that seeing how things work matters more than following tradition, who showed that tiny spaces with smart design outperform large spaces with conventional construction. Because sometimes the girl building 2 roofs knows more about insulation than carpenters building 1 roof. The tiny cabin everyone called inadequate was actually superior engineering, and air, when trapped properly, provides insulation that expensive materials can't match. The cabin proved that survival isn't about size or money, it's about understanding physics.